Hi there, welcome to this podcast from the MS Trust, Breaking It Down. I'm Nick and I'm also joined by our host Helena. How are you, Helena?
I am doing well today. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. I'm getting a little bit hungry because our podcast this week is all about diet. So if you hear my tummy rumbling, just ignore me.
That's the worst thing when you start talking about food. That it's like instant cue that the stomach needs to start rumbling, doesn't it?
I know, 100%, 100%. And yeah, so in this podcast, we're going to be talking all about MS diets. We get lots of questions about that. We get questions about what you can eat, what might improve or worsen your symptoms or your progression. And we also get a lot of questions in regards to some of these sort of specific diets, what they entail and what people should be following.
The idea that you could be able to control or influence your MS with the aid of diet is, of course, extremely appealing because it's something that you could do yourself. You don't really need a health professional's input about it. And if you just jump onto social media, you'll hear people talk so passionately about how this diet that they follow and now they're managing their MS. But you also get a lot of people who disagree with it and the approaches. And all these approaches are quite different from each other. So it can get very confusing quickly. So that's why we thought, let's do some podcasts on these topics.
That's right, Helena. And I know just from my own experience, I was trying to eat a little bit more healthily last year. And I was looking on social media quite a lot, and which I know is not a great place to get dietary information from, by the way. But, you know, my feed quickly became sort of full of nutritionists and personal trainers, dietitians, that kind of thing. Lots of them are very different messages. You know, there's people who are doing carnivore diet, paleo, keto, Mediterranean, vegan, raw vegan. You know, so it can very quickly become very confusing. A lot of the information is follow this diet, and if you don't, you're wrong, which is really difficult.
Yeah.
You know, then you throw in something like MS as well, and you've got, you know, a really difficult puzzle to untangle. So that's why in this episode, we're going to be learning a little bit more about two of the most popular MS diets. So that's the Wahls Protocol and also the Overcoming MS lifestyle and diet. So we'll be talking to Dr. Terry Wahls from the Wahls Protocol and also Samantha Josephs from Overcoming MS.
So in the next episode, we'll be talking to a registered dietitian called Claire, who also lives with MS herself, and she works at the Neurotherapy Center. And we will discuss some practical approaches to diet when you have MS. Sounds like, food preparation, what do you cook when you're really fatigued, and cost. You know, that we're all feeling the pressure of cost of living at the moment in the UK. So there's a lot of other things around diet that we're going to be discussing with her. And then finally, we will chat to our own Claire Winchester, who works here with us in the information team at the MS Trust. And she will help us look at why diet is a tricky subject to research and what research and studies are actually out there when it comes to MS and diets.
Yeah, so it's a two-parter, isn't it, Helena? So this is part one, and then next week, part two will come out. But without any further ado, I think we'll jump into our interview with Dr. Terry Wahls. Hi there, everyone. We're very excited today. We're joined by Dr. Terry Wahls, and lots of our listeners and people watching this will be familiar with yourself, Dr. Terry Wahls. But for anyone who's not seen your work before, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself for us.
Sure. So I have a unique position in all of this because I personally have multiple sclerosis. I spent 4 years in a tilt recline wheelchair, relentlessly getting worse. And fortunately, I asked myself, am I doing all that I can? And I began reading the basic science, which is a bit of a chore because I'm an internal medicine doc. I'm not a neurologist. But I would decide that mitochondrial dysfunction is what drove disability. I create a supplement cocktail that slows my decline somewhat. My fatigue is a little less severe. I discovered studies in electrical stimulation of muscles. I add that to my physical therapy. Then I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine. They have a course on neuroprotection, talks a lot about mitochondria. I'm super excited. So I have a longer list of supplements, which I add. Then I have a really big aha, and I laugh at myself for how long it took to have this aha. Like, what if I redesigned the paleo diet that I've been following for 5 years based on this long list of supplements, figure out where those ingredients are in the food supply. So now I have a very structured paleo diet, which I adopt. And that's really when the magic begins to happen. My physical therapist notes that I'm getting stronger. We advance my exercises. I begin walking again, first with walking sticks, then without. And then in May, on Mother's Day, I really want to try riding my bike. And my family, we have an emergency family meeting. My kids don't want me to do that because they're afraid I'll fall. But my wife says, let's give it a try. So she tells my big son, who's 6'5", Zach, you run alongside on the left. And my daughter, who's 13, she should run alongside on the right, and she'll follow. We get on my bike, and I bike around the block. First time in 6 years. Now that big 16-year-old boy, he's crying. Zebby is crying. Jackie's crying. You know, when I relive that moment, tears can still come to my eyes because that was the moment where, the question of how much recovery might be possible. Because people with a progressive neurologic condition, we let go of the future. Yet even though I was remarkably better, I didn't know what any of it meant until I rode that bike. And it's like, how much recovery might be possible. And so I kept working at it. And in October, Jackie signs up for the Courage Ride, which was 18.5 miles. And in fact, I finished that ride. And once again, we're all crying. And that's when my understanding of disease and health is transformed. I shift how I practice medicine. And my chief of internal medicine at the university and chief of staff at the VA want me to do a clinical trials testing, can others with progressive MS do what I've done? And that really launched my research career. And so since that time, really is 2010, I've been on this mission to conduct the research, investigating diet and lifestyle for people with MS, and teaching the public, both consumers, people with MS, their caregivers, and other clinicians, the important role of diet and lifestyle in managing the symptoms that people have with MS.
Wow, that moment that you described so vividly, that must have been, as you say, a really emotional time for you and your family too. Thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah.
It was, at that point, really 7 months earlier, before I redesigned my diet and had discovered functional medicine, it was so clear to me that my trajectory of my illness, 27 years of worsening electrical face pain, 7 years of worsening multiple sclerosis, I was clearly on track to become bedridden by my illness, probably demented by my illness, and probably have the trigeminal neuralgia turn on and die with intractable, horrific levels of pain. So I had an incredibly grim future. But, I also had 2 kids who were watching me, and I was like, okay, I just have to do the best that I can, even though I have this very disturbing, frightening future ahead of me.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And you've touched on kind of what led you up to this journey that you've been on with diet. Could you tell us what the Wahls Protocol is?
Oh, sure. So I want everyone to know that I had adopted the paleo diet after 20 years of being a vegetarian. And the paleo diet did not stop my decline. Then I added some supplements that helped my fatigue. And that was really focused on some B vitamins, creatine, carnitine. And then, I redesigned the paleo diet. And now it's a very structured form. So 6 to 12 ounces of meat, sort of like 2 palm-sized servings of meat, and then 9 cups of vegetables. And that's 3 cups would be like a dinner plate full of vegetables, raw. So when it's cooked, probably about half that amount. And we're talking green leafy vegetables, spinach, Swiss chard, kale, collards, sulfur-rich vegetables in the onion, mushroom, cabbage family, and then deeply colored things like beets, carrots, berries. And I encourage fermented foods. I encourage organ meats. And if you're small, if you're petite, it's proportionately less. There's no need to overconsume beyond what your appetite will allow. But when I'm teaching this and using this in my clinical practice, I'm at the Veteran Affairs Hospital in the Iowa City area. And so most of my patients were men. I didn't want them to be hungry. So I'm trying to fill them up on things that were good for them. These radical things known as meat, not so radical. Vegetables, very radical. When I was telling my vets, the goal is 9 cups of vegetables, they're like, okay, doc, was that per week or month?
Wow.
I'm
Wow.
laughing. No, that's per day.
Wow. Wow. And Dr. Terry, when you kind of say that it's designed based on paleo, for anyone
Yes.
who's not
Yeah.
familiar with that
So
term, yeah,
let me sort of give the background here. Humans separated from other primates about 6 million years ago, and we're eating lots of leaves, roots, some berries, gradually more meat. And Homo sapiens, we separate distinctly 250,000 years ago. We're eating more meat, vegetables, green leaves. Then we migrate all over the world into all sorts of ecosystems. And again, we're still eating what is locally available, meat and a variety of herbs in ratios that vary according to the ecosystem. So what we're trying to do is to have people eat before we had grains, legumes, and dairy, which is relatively recent, just 10,000 years ago. So there are many versions of the paleo diet that, based on our ancestral patterns, and it really comes down to eating meat, fish, eggs, um, greens, roots, berries that are ecologically fitting in with your parts of the world.
sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's there's so many different diets out there, isn't there? And so many different kind of
Correct. You know,
terminology and yeah,
and I want to make clear to people that it's not that you have to eat exactly the kinds of foods that I find here in North America and Iowa, the middle of the country. If you're in Europe or Africa, Asia, there are going to be cultural differences. Um, the problem is the westernized diet, which is designed to appeal to our taste and with a lot of food additives to create cravings. It has too much sugar, too much carbohydrates, not enough protein, not enough of these phytonutrients from plants, and so our health, rapidly declines if you have a standard Westernized diet. And it's designed to be very appealing. So we overconsume sugar, we overconsume flour-based products. If you just get rid of those 2 big categories, added sugar and flour-based foods, so you had more vegetables and meat according to your appetite, I predict your health would significantly improve.
So is that things like pasta and bread that you'd be cutting out
Pasta,
of that?
bread, cereals, so delicious, so yummy, shift our microbiome in harmful ways. Vegetables, meat, fish are much more supportive of a healthier microbiome.
Yeah, absolutely. And just listening to you there, Dr. Terry, I was wondering about fruit, where that
Oh,
comes in.
yeah. So plants in general all have a little bit of plant poison to keep the insects from eating them, to keep the other animals from eating them. And it's And I want people to know that the dose of these ingredients and plants determined, is this helpful to us or harmful to us? For the vast majority of plants, if you eat a wide variety of plants, all of those small toxins really help our biochemistry work more effectively. And so the key thing is diversity in the plants that we consume.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, and in terms of sort of the research that you've
Yeah.
obviously done into this diet, could you tell us a bit more about what you've found out?
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to talk in two big categories. One, the diets that we've investigated are paleo, low saturated fat, ketogenic diets. And what we have found consistently in those three diets is, compared to the standard westernized diet, high in added sugar, high in processed foods, we lower the carbs, increase the fats, and we stress healthy fats. That as people adopt these intervention diets, again, paleo, ketogenic, low saturated fat, fatigue is reduced, quality of life is improved. And in some of these studies, we see significant improvements in walking function and also hand function. Then we've done another research, which I think is very, very compelling for your audience. In I believe it was May of 2021, we did what's called a meta-analysis. It's a network meta-analysis. So we're able to go look at all of the published controlled research studies that and that were randomized, that enrolled people with a diet intervention and looked at changes in fatigue, changes in quality of life. And what we saw is that all of these diets are somewhat helpful, with the exception of calorie restriction. Calorie restriction led to more fatigue, which is probably not surprising. But intermittent fasting, ketogenic, anti-inflammatory, low saturated fat, Mediterranean, and the paleo diets, all were helpful. And then if we look at something called the 95% confidence interval, so you take the mean outcome, standard deviation, and then there's another bar, the 95% confidence interval. If that 95% confidence interval favors the diet intervention over the control, then you can say with confidence that diet intervention will help reduce fatigue, help improve quality of life. And for reducing fatigue, it was low saturated fat, Mediterranean diet, paleo diet. Paleo diet was about 40% more effective than Mediterranean or low saturated fat. For improving quality of life, there were two diets that had that 95% confidence interval. It was paleo diet and Mediterranean. And the paleo diet is about twice as effective as the Mediterranean. The message from this is, work on improving your diet at the pace that you and your family can achieve. The diet that had the strongest evidence was the paleo diet, but they're all helpful. Whether you're doing the paleo, Mediterranean, low saturated fat, those are the three most helpful. Ketogenic intermittent fasting, also helpful, but the 95% confidence interval sort of spills over into the control. So the evidence is not quite as strong. I think we'll just need to have larger studies, so we just have a little bit more data points for those two diets.
That's great to hear you say, that actually the other diets also, you can see some of these positive effects
absolutely.
that you're talking about. Yeah.
And what I stress when I'm teaching the clinicians is, you need to work with the patient and their family. I may have an opinion about which diet I think is most effective for them, but then I also ask, what kind of dietary pattern are you and your family interested in? Because there are many that we can consider here. And for some, they're really gung-ho. They want to do a ketogenic diet because they have some insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, or obesity. And so then a ketogenic diet would be better for them. Others will tell us that because of their culinary preferences, they would really prefer a Mediterranean diet. And I'm like, by all means, that's a great diet. Go ahead and do that. Then I have others who, have heard my story. They're very inspired. They really, the concept of a paleo diet appeals to them. And like, absolutely, that's what we should do. And then we have others who have a family history of heart disease. And so they've been wanting to do a low saturated fat diet. And I'm like, yes, the key to success is have a conversation as a family. What would you like to add to your diet? And the additions are always easier than the subtraction. So I want people to do the adds first. And then when you're ready, start working on reducing and eliminating the foods that, as a family, you guys agree would be helpful to take out of your line of sight.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you for going through kind of the work behind the Wahls Protocol as well. And obviously you've talked a lot about some of the sort of the benefits that you've seen through your research.
Yes.
Are there any drawbacks that you see at all?
Oh, sure. Well, when you're making changes to what we're eating, the culinary preferences are deeply personal, and so that can potentially lead to some conflict in the family. So I think it's vital to have conversations and respectful negotiations about what the family is open to doing, how they may support you, and that they may decide, okay, when we're eating with you, we're going to follow the Wahls Protocol, or we're going to follow the ketogenic diet, whichever diet you've agreed to. When the family is not in your presence, not in your line of sight, they should get to eat whatever they want. And I really have to stress that the line of sight has to do with when you're all together, but when you're away, you get to eat what you want. Sometimes this can lead to discussions that are difficult. And occasionally I send people to a talk therapist, a family therapist, so they can have a respectful conversation about how to support these lifestyle changes. And sometimes what I see is that the family has been so stressed, so unhappy, so dysfunctional that we really have to repair family dynamics first,
Sure.
so they can be successful. And then the other comment that I'll have is, depending on the diet that you're following, there may be some things that we know. If you're on the paleo diet, there'll be less calcium intake, so you have to think about that. If you have plenty of greens, that offsets that. Or if you have a nut milk fortified with calcium, that will be offset. If you're on a ketogenic diet, you have to be careful you don't lose too much weight. And so there are some contraindications to doing a ketogenic diet.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I was wondering, I don't know if you have any firm numbers for this, but for people who start the Wahls Protocol, do you know how many people stick with it?
Oh, sure. Well, I can tell you, based on our research, and this is truly extraordinary. When you do clinical trials, any diet intervention, because you're asking people to, start new recipes, new foods, give up family favorites, you anticipate a 20 to 30% dropout rate. And when you do a clinical trial, you plan for that 20 to 30% dropout rate. In our trials, we've had people from enrollment to the end. The most recent trial that we published, we had a 95% adherence to the study diet at the end. Now, that's extraordinary. Yeah, and I think the reason we've been able to be so successful is when if you change your diet, and you have to get people through the first month where you have the craving, you're sort of cranky, like, oh my God, I really miss my cheese. I really miss my pasta. But you get them past that, and they're feeling better, feeling much better. And so now things are going really well. And let's say 3 months later, they're at a friend's party and they indulge in some foods that they had given up. chips, pasta, whatever. And their fatigue is back, their headaches are back, their joint pain is back. And they're like, oh my God, that was so not worth it. I'm not doing it again. And so this is what we see with people adopting either the paleo or the keto diet. They get symptoms reduction. If they go off the diet, the return of symptoms usually happens within 24 hours. And so they get a very clear message like, that is so not worth it. So they stay on the diet. If you do the Mediterranean diet or the low saturated fat diet, and you have a dietarian discretion, there's not such a big the recurrence of symptoms is not as dramatic.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, in terms of someone who might sort of listen to this and they might come away and sort of think, oh, I'd like to give the Wahls Protocol a chance, and they might they might stick with it for a while. Maybe they might have an MS relapse or some kind of progression. What would you say to those people?
So whatever diet that you plan to try, look for resources. If you decide to do the Wahls Protocol, you can go to my website, pick up one of my books, and that will give you some resources. And all of us screw up. All of us, accidentally or intentionally eat some foods that are not compatible. And you may have a flare of your symptoms and want to beat yourself up. And my advice is forgive yourself for being human and just start over again. And this will be true whether you're doing the Wahls Protocol or any of the other dietary interventions that you started. You may stumble now and then. Just start over again. And that is the nature of being human. We sometimes stumble and make a choice that we later regret. And they're like, okay, I'm not going to do that again.
Sure. So if you have a slip up and you eat something that is not part of the Wahls Protocol, and then that would be that situation. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, and come back to it. And I think as someone who's tried lots of different diets, I know about that a lot. So,
yeah,
absolutely.
And really, the key that I want everyone to hear is that just make changes at a pace that you can manage. If the first thing you're going to do is, instead of having sugar sweetened beverages, 4 of them a day, I'm going to cut it down to 3 or 2 a day. And I'm going to have sparkling water or herbal teas as an alternative. And then maybe the next intervention is, and I'm going to have a salad every day. So make your interventions small enough that you can be successful. And I think you'll, but I also know that some people are like, man, I got a terrible diagnosis. I'm going to be all in. And some people are ready to, pick up my book, implement the Wahls Protocol, or do the ketogenic version, implement that. And we also see people newly diagnosed they feel like they got a wake-up call and they make radical improvements to their self-care plans. It's a matter of what speaks to your heart and your family, what you can do.
Sure, absolutely. And I guess whether or not someone's following the Wahls Protocol or another diet, if someone was to, I guess we often kind of hear about this idea of sort of failing at something. So for someone who might get some of those benefits from following the Wahls Protocol or a different diet, but then at some point their MS progresses, or something like that.
They may have a relapse because it is a relapsing disease. You anticipate about 1 relapse per year, and so just improve your self-care. By all means, check in with your doc because you may have a bladder infection that's really driving all this, or another viral infection that's driving all this. So absolutely check in with your doc. Look at your self-care. Look at, was there a toxin exposure? Was there stress at work? Is there a big conflict with my children that's driving all of this, and because was there a toxin exposure? So all of those factors can drive the relapse. It may not have been your diet at all. It may have been the fact that I have this huge conflict at work that is really bothering me.
Sure, yeah. So it's, it's not seeing it as you've done something wrong. It's just that, there might be other things going on, or, just I like what you say about just coming back to it and just, resetting.
Coming back to it.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Terry. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention about the diet or about your work while we've got you?
So we're doing a really big clinical trial right now comparing a keto, paleo to usual diet, following people for 2 years. We'll have MRIs at the beginning and at the end. We're recruiting 156 people. My team tells me that I have 152 scheduled, so we're getting close to, and I anticipate that we'll finally have the enrollment completed by the end of July. We'll follow them for 2 years, which means that we'll have all of our data by the end of 2026. So we'll be cleaning the data and analyzing it and presenting that research in 2027. So research is an endurance sport. It's occasionally you get your pilot studies, that's very fast. The longer studies with larger numbers are what we need to really answer the question, what's the role of food? I'm excited that we're doing that. We're also finally analyzing my freezer, where we have all these biospecimens to see what changes as people implement these diets and how that is correlated to clinical changes. And so we'll be analyzing that and probably reporting on that mechanistic studies sometime next year. And all of this is what it needs to understand the mechanisms of why diet can have such a big impact, and to understand which diets are the most helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And for anyone who wants to find out more about your work, your diets, where's the best place to go to?
I want you to do a couple of things. Go to terrywahls.com, TERRY, Wahls, WAHLS.com. Be sure to sign up for my newsletters so you can hear all of our announcements. Follow me on Instagram. That's Dr. Terry Wahls. You get to see what I'm eating, doing, see me as I live my life, and you'll see me talking about the research that's coming out and what are the interesting self-care items that you can do to help support your healing journey.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for giving up your time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Terry.
All right. Much love to you and your family, and thank you for all the work you guys are doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here's where there will be an advert. You know this by now because we say it every time. We are a charity, so we don't do adverts. But so instead, we'd like to take this opportunity to tell you all about our own resources for people with MS.
That's right, Helena, and a good place to start is our website. So that's mstrust.org.uk. And on there's lots of information about diet and also all aspects of life with MS. Head over to the A to Z of MS on our website and head for D for diets. And on there, you'll see lots of information about different ways to support healthy eating. As Helena mentioned, we don't advertise in our podcasts, so they are completely free. But if this information has been helpful for you today, do consider leaving us a donation. You can find the donation link in the show notes, or if you head over to our website, you can leave us a donation there too. Thank you so much.
And now let's continue on with Overcoming MS and hear all about their approach and program.
Hi there, and welcome back. We're joined by Samantha Josephs from Overcoming MS. Hi Sam, how are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And to start with, could you tell us about yourself and your own link to MS?
Yeah, sure. So in 2002, my husband Danny was diagnosed with MS, and we knew very little about the condition, and we really felt like we needed to take ownership a little bit. So we went off and did some exploration. There wasn't a lot of support offered to us by the neurologist at that time. And I discovered MS UK and started becoming aware of the fact that there were diet and lifestyle recommendations that could improve the experience, the relapse rate, and disability progression. I then qualified as a nutritional therapist a few years later, and my own practice really built up, meeting people in the MS community. A large part of my own one-to-one therapy practice is people with MS. I lecture at two of the key colleges in the UK in the module on MS as well, teaching future nutritional therapists all about the condition. And in 2018, I joined the Overcoming MS charity as one of their facilitators. So Overcoming MS is the world's leading lifestyle, healthy lifestyle charity for people with MS, and very much aligned with what I myself had come across in the research, and was teaching my clients as well. So I've been working with Overcoming MS since 2018, helping to spread the word and support people, empower people in the community about the impact that diet and lifestyle changes can have on the trajectory of the condition.
Wow, amazing. And can you tell us a little bit more about the Overcoming MS diet?
Yeah. The Overcoming MS diet is one of 7 pillars. So it's actually an Overcoming MS program. Diet is often thought of as the cornerstone of the diet, simply because we're confronted with having to eat something at least 3 times a day. But the Overcoming MS program is a sort of holistic, whole body approach. So it also encompasses vitamin D and sunshine, physical activity, stress management, medications when appropriate, family health as well, and changing your life for life. So the Overcoming diet is part of that sort of bigger holistic approach. And in a nutshell, it is a low saturated fat diet that's very high in polyunsaturated fats, or the good fats in the diet. So we supplement the diet with an extra 2 to 4 spoonfuls, like dessert spoonfuls of flaxseed oil daily. It is dairy-free, whole food, plant-based, with fish, oily fish, white fish, seafood if desired, although some people prefer to go fully vegan. So we're really sort of controlling for saturated fats, and minimizing sort of processed and other sort of artificial fats and additives that are added as well, with an emphasis on whole food. So some people think of it as a dairy-free pescatarian approach. Other people call it vegan with fish. There are a few other nuances as well, sort of controlling for saturated fats. For example, we encourage the use of egg whites, but we suggest limiting or avoiding egg yolks as well, because that's where we get saturated fat in the diet.
That's really interesting. And so I'm just listening to you there, and I'm thinking that already sounds like a bit different to some of the other diets that are out there. But what are some of those things that make it sort of a unique diet to follow?
Right. Well, I think what makes it different is that, as I mentioned, it's part of a bigger program. It's part of a bigger approach, and it's very much encouraged that that you embrace all elements of the program as well. So it's a diet and lifestyle approach together as an adjunctive treatment with medication to really, give you the best chances in living well with MS. There were quite a lot of crossovers with the Overcoming MS diet with some of the other MS diets that are out there. For example, the emphasis on whole foods and lots of plant-based proteins, nuts and seeds, whole grains, beans and lentils and things. Avoiding dairy as well. That's another area where it seems to cross over with some of the other diets. But I think that it's most similar, I think, in understanding it to a Mediterranean diet. A Mediterranean diet would emphasize lots of those nuts, beans, lentils, whole grains, fish and seafood, and limit things like meat and dairy. And what's different about the Overcoming MS diet is it sort of modifies that approach. It's kind of taking all the evidence that we have around the Mediterranean diet and just how healthful that is. In fact, the evidence suggests it's possibly the most healthful diet for us all to be following, on the planet, and makes a few sort of specific tweaks to make it tailored to somebody managing MS. So rather than having small amounts of meat and dairy, the Overcoming MS program has taken dairy and meat off the menu completely, based on the research that is suggestive around dairy and immune responses that may even trigger myelin destruction, meat as well. Diets that are full of sort of land meat animals tend to be associated with less healthful outcomes generally when we talk about any chronic condition or longevity at all. So it's really just making a few tweaks to that sort of basic framework of something like a Mediterranean diet and enhancing it to make it specific to people with MS.
It's really interesting that you borrowed some of the Mediterranean diet and made some sort of specific tweaks for the people who follow it. So that's great. And you spoke a little bit there about sort of the evidence and the research. Could you tell us a little bit more about the research behind the Overcoming MS diet?
Yeah, so the research is really key, and the emphasis is really very much on the fact that the program, all elements of the program, not just the diet, are very much grounded in evidence and the latest research. The primary research for diet is based on the very well-known study by someone called Dr. Roy Swank, I'm sure you've probably heard of, who in the 1950s had made the sort of associative link between diets that were high in saturated fat and increased risk of MS. And so he took 150 people with MS and he asked them to follow a very low saturated fat diet. I think the average saturated fat content of a standard American diet is around 30 grams. So he was asking them to aim for more like 20 grams of saturated fat a day. And in those 150 people, about half of them managed really well, averaging around 16 grams of saturated fat a day. And he called them the good dieters. The other half a group managed more around 20 grams of saturated fat. And what he noticed at the end, it was an incredibly long study, almost unheard of. He followed them over a period of time, but at the very end of the study, 34 years later, he noticed that those good dieters, the one that had stuck to the sort of more like 16 grams of saturated fat, out of that group, 94% of those people were still ambulant and walking, compared to only 7% in the bad dieters, as he called them, in the other group. So the basis for the Overcoming MS diet and the sort of understanding around fats is sort of hinged on the work of Dr. Roy Swank. But if you sort of fast forward to 1999, we're out the 1950s now, an Australian doctor called Professor George Jelinek He himself was diagnosed with MS after having lost his mother to the condition. And being a doctor, and I think he was also one of the editors of one of the high profile journals, medical journals at the time. So he used his doctor skill set to investigate and try and pull together all the published research on multiple sclerosis. And his findings, he basically found about more than 1,500 papers that helped formulate the 7 pillars of the Overcoming MS program. And in the early sort of, I think it was about in 2011, I think it might have been, they say he set up something called the Wahls study, which was a self-reporting cross-sectional study of over 2,500 people all over the world in 57 different countries, following them every 2.5 years and monitoring what they eat, how they live, and how this impacts disease expression. And the Wahls study has produced a huge number of peer-reviewed papers as well, and has helped to sort of tweak and shape the Overcoming MS program. Broader research as well has sort of really picked up in the last maybe sort of 8 years, 10 years tops. And what we're seeing as well is some really high quality prospective studies, and even a few randomized controlled trials that are all picking up on the notion that a high quality diet can really impact disease progression, disability risk, relapse risk, have a massive impact on things like depression, fatigue, quality of life. So while we don't yet have in the studies an absolutely definitive gold standard diet, what is coming through in the more recent literature is that the idea of this high quality diet. And in the journal Neurology last year, there was an editorial published that actually said something like, it is now recognized that a healthy diet is an important adjunct of managing MS well. So I think we're seeing more and more that the research is backing the idea of a high quality diet. And I keep saying high quality diet. What this is defined as in the literature is a diet that is rich in beans, lentils, tofu, whole grains, oily fish, white fish, and then low in things like added sugars, processed foods, and high saturated fatty foods as well. So what they're seeing, this high quality level of diet, is something, again, very much reflected by the Overcoming MS diet guidelines.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, thank you for talking us through that. You've touched on some of these points already through your other through our discussions, but what are some of the sort of perceived benefits that people following the Overcoming MS diet see?
Yeah. Well, if following the Overcoming MS diet really gives you like a framework. So it's prescriptive, but not too restrictive, but it helps you sort of identify what foods and how to include them so that you can hit the target of having what we see in the literature as a high quality diet and improve your chances of living well with MS. As I said before, the broader research is highlighting elements such as the impact that the microbiome, the good and bad bacteria, have in terms of balancing our immune systems and keeping us well. Having a plant-focused approach like the Overcoming MS diet is a really key way to support the microbiome as well. We know anti-inflammatory diets, for example, are really helpful in things like rheumatoid arthritis, another autoimmune condition, and the Overcoming MS diet with the extra cold-pressed flaxseed oil every day is really increasing that omega-3 powerfully anti-inflammatory oil in the body that can really affect inflammation in the body. So whether you've got relapsing, remitting, or a progressive form of MS, we know that inflammation is still a key feature. So that's been a really amazing benefit as well. The holism study specifically showed that the flaxseed oil, adding flaxseed oil to the diet, could even perhaps reduce relapse rate by up to 60%. And following a low saturated fat diet is thought to reduce disability progression by up to 42%. Because it's the program as well, it includes things like physical activity. It includes things like monitoring and maintaining optimal vitamin D levels and getting sunshine. So again, there are benefits there for preventing depression, improving quality of life, managing stress. Stress is a huge trigger for relapses and can be often that first trigger that leads to an initial diagnosis. So the Overcoming MS program recommends meditation as a daily practice to manage stress. And again, that can improve the long-term trajectory of living well with MS. And managing all these, living a really healthful diet like this and a sort of a healthy composite lifestyle as well, reduces the risk of other secondary conditions, perhaps type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease, which we know, again, also can further complicate and exacerbate multiple sclerosis sort of as we age. So again, tackling it from that angle is also really powerful. One of the latest studies to have come out connected to the Australian centre, the NEU, that's looking at sort of lifestyle interventions and their impact on MS, was looking retrospectively back at a cohort of people and following their sort of diet intake and their lifestyle practices. And they noticed that the higher quality your diet was, the fact you could potentially even reduce disability progression by up to 50%. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, looking after your diet and your lifestyle is really going to give you the best opportunity to live well with MS.
Thank you so much, Sam. And in your eyes, are there any potential drawbacks of following the Overcoming MS diet?
No, I don't see any drawbacks, and we do like to kind of think positively. And one of the 7 pillars is change your life for life. And the recognition that this isn't a diet, this isn't something that you do for a couple of months and then revert back, or you fall off the wagon. It's not like that. This is about recognizing that MS is a long-term chronic progressive condition, and once diagnosed with it, you will live with it forever. And really sort of not being too hard on yourself maybe when you first implement it, because sometimes people feel a pressure to maybe make all the changes at once overnight. And for some people, that's great. The cold turkey effect is exactly what they're looking for, and they can go from 0 to hero overnight. But for other people, they might need to slowly adopt and adapt to the recommendations over a more lengthy period to make those changes really sustainable. So that's really where the charity comes in as well, because there are so many resources available to support the community, to provide free online resources and places to go to get help and information and tips and recipes and all that kind of stuff. So I don't see any drawbacks, but I think that for some people, trying to do too much too quickly might feel like it's overwhelming, and then I would encourage people to take things more slowly and implement things one at a time. and not to be overwhelmed in the beginning.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. And for some of those people who maybe are feeling overwhelmed when they first start following this lifestyle, do you know roughly how many people sort of stick to following the Overcoming MS lifestyle and how many people drop out?
Yeah, so I don't think people drop out, as you put it. I think what it is it's like an education of how, as I said, to reach that high quality diet. And even if you can't stick to all the recommendations, what I found in my practice personally, dealing with people, some people they just can't let go of the dark chocolate, or they just can't let go of the chicken breast, or and that's fine, because overall the general dietary pattern changes and improves so much more that they are reaching much closer to that goal of the high quality diet. So I think I don't think people don't not stick to it. I think people learn what they could and should be aiming for, and they can get there in their own time, whether it's 10 months or 10 years. But, we all change. MS isn't going anywhere. And if you know what it is you're aiming for, in introducing those changes at the right time for you, I think is really, really helpful in terms of sticking to it.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to you there, it sounds like it's a sort of a long-term, goal that you follow, and your lifestyle kind of changes as you go, and it's not a right, do this for 6 weeks and lose this much weight, and then that's and then go back to eating whatever you want. It's certainly not a yo-yo diet.
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't. And it's a shame that we only have that word diet, because it has that connotation that it's something that you can fall off the bandwagon, or you can give up the diet. It's an eating pattern. It's a style of eating. It's changing your life for life, and introducing different ways of creating tasty, healthful meal, just making different choices.
Thank you. And with some people who talk to us from the MS community, sometimes they'll say, something like, I've tried X and Y diet or lifestyle and I've had a relapse, or my MS is progressing. And sometimes it can feel like they've almost sort of failed at doing the thing that they were aiming for. But actually, it might not have anything to do with their diet or their lifestyle. It might just be the way that their MS is progressing. What would you say to anyone who's sort of following the Overcoming MS lifestyle and, has that relapse, that progression? And what would you say to that person who would be in that situation?
Yeah, well, there's no medication, there's no diet, there's no lifestyle, there's no herb supplement magic pill that's going to cure MS. Everybody's MS is very different, and we can't always control external factors either, such as things like life stresses. I mean, I would say that remembering that this is a lifestyle, long-term commitment, or commitment maybe makes it sound like difficult to achieve, but this is a goal or an aim to try and stay on this healthy pattern throughout life. And it may be that MS simmers away and remains active, but a relapse or progression doesn't mean that you are not providing massive healthful benefits to your body. As I mentioned before, the risk of cardiovascular disease or secondary lifestyle illnesses will be avoided as well with this kind of approach. Yeah, I mean, do we know, would the MS perhaps be more aggressive without these interventions as well? So, yeah, I don't mean that to sound flippant, but Unfortunately, we don't have a cure for MS, and all we can do is take what's out there, and what's out there is the evidence that shows us diet and lifestyle together with medication are really the best chance you could give yourself, I think.
Thank you. No, that's great, and I'm sure it's reassuring for lots of people as well. Currently, time of recording this, there's a cost of living crisis in the UK. I'm sure lots of people listening to this will feel that pressure at times. So how easy is this diet to follow from a financial point of view?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty easy to follow. I think when you're not buying meat, you'll notice that your household budget comes right down. Meat is actually quite expensive. Other sort of expensive things that we don't really notice and that we will be letting go of on the Overcoming MS diet would be things like processed, shop-bought biscuits, cakes, pastries, and things like that, and replacing them with fresh fruit, which is much cheaper. I know that the idea of making a whole food diet can sometimes be perceived as being more expensive, but there are ways around that with things like bulk buying, rather than always relying on fresh fruit and vegetables, thinking about the frozen varieties, which are often at least as fresh, if not fresher, than the fresh ones because they're frozen on the day that they're picked, and they also prevent wasting. Beans and lentils, tofu are all really affordable, cheap ways to feed a family as well. Chickpea stews and curries, a marinara lentil sauce with pasta. These are all much cheaper than, for example, using a bolognese. So I think that it is cost effective, and I think that it can be affordable as well.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And from following on from that point, is this diet something that anyone who lives with MS can follow, or is it some people that it wouldn't be appropriate for?
No, I'd say everyone can follow this diet. And beyond that, I would say that because it's very similar to the Mediterranean diet, which is the most well-studied dietary pattern and agreed upon healthful approach to eating. I'd say that it's healthy for people without MS as well. So other family members, partners, kids, siblings, parents, anyone else who lives in the house with you as well would also benefit from eating in this way. Obviously, they wouldn't have the same direct needs, and wouldn't necessarily have to be quite so adherent when they were outside the home. But I think it's also really helpful for people, especially in my practice. I see a lot of mums who were worried about having to make different meals for people. If I'm going to eat the Overcoming MS diet, does that mean I have to cook my own meals separately, and I'm tired and fatigued and it's difficult to cook for the rest of the family a different meal? And I'd say that it's absolutely really applicable to feed the whole family an Overcoming MS friendly diet. So yeah, I would say it's good for everyone, good for everybody with MS, and beyond.
Brilliant, thank you. And if people are listening to this and thinking, oh, we want to find out more, where's the best place to get that information?
Oh, well, if they want to get really down in the nitty gritty and read all the evidence, then there's the Overcoming MS book, which has got all the evidence base in it. So that's where the sort of the real nitty gritty of the program is. There's an Overcoming MS cookbook as well. Both of those are available on Amazon. There's also a handbook which has been written by members of the community that gives a little bit of a broader insight to living with the program and how to implement the program. But as far as free resources go, the Overcoming MS website, which is www.overcomingms.org, has got the most extensive library of resources. So you can find out all about the diet, you can find out all about the other pillars as well. There's a whole page of hundreds of recipes. There are exercise videos, there are meditation guided videos. There's a podcast as well. So the Living Well with MS, which is available on the sort of the usual podcast channels. And you can find it by clicking through on the website. And lots of interesting guests on the podcast there as well, and community members sharing tips and things. If you want to know more specifically about following the diet, there's some online learning available through the website as well. There's something called the Pathways program, which is an opportunity to meet different facilitators who have got training in the different specialist areas, and have more of a sort of a discussion and get more of a deep dive on different elements of the program. And there's something called the 6 Months to Overcoming MS online program as well, which is available through the website. Or through the website, there's an app called the Live Well Hub, which you can also download from the App Store. And in the Live Well Hub, you can access the 6 Months to Overcoming MS program. And there's a whole 6 months to the Overcoming MS diet on there. And it sort of, it gives you a very guided and supported way to try and make some of those changes a bit more slowly and implement things one step at a time, so that by the end of the 6 months, you'll be amazed just how sort of compliant and what a way you've come in changing diet to be more like resembling this high quality diet. And I'd say the Live Well Hub is also a really great way to access the community, the Overcoming MS community. And they have Overcoming MS circles, which are sort of geographically located pockets of OMSs around the country and indeed globally, and leaning on the community, the support and the tips, interesting sort of hacks and recipe sharing is amazing. So loads and loads and loads of free resources and support from the Overcoming MS charity website. Yeah, definitely a place to go.
Brilliant. Thank you. We'll make sure we link to the Overcoming MS website in the show notes as well. So thank you so much, Sam. That was really, really helpful. And thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Hi there. This is just a quick disclaimer for this podcast where we speak to 2 guests who advocate for specific diets to manage MS. At the MS Trust, we'd always advocate speaking to a health professional before you embark on any significant dietary changes. Whilst the diets featured may work well for some people, it's important to remember that everyone's MS is different.
I think you did a great job talking to both of these people, Nick. I think it was really, really interesting to hear all about how their different approaches are working. And it really kind of shows that that both of them sort of acknowledging that there isn't really one size fits all when it comes to diets. And I think they were both quite open about the importance to eat healthy, but what it looks like might be different from person to person. Because I think sometimes, as we mentioned at the start, it can get very confusing on social media. And some people who really, really strongly believe that this diet has changed their life, they really want to sort of get everybody else on board with their ideas, and they can be so passionate about it that it can sometimes almost come across as a little bit aggressive. I've certainly experienced that myself when I was first diagnosed. There was lots of people that would sort of say, "Oh, you should do this, you should do that. This works for my wife, so you should be doing it as well." And I think that's why it's so important to actually listen to how something works, and then have a little think about it, whether that would work for you. And I think it was really, really, really interesting to listen to them. And I think it was also very interesting to hear how much research has gone into both of their programs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, it was really refreshing
Mm.
actually to talk to him because, yeah, I know just from my own social media, and I know social media is not the best place to get nutrition advice, obviously. But you know, as you said, there's aggressiveness. There's like only follow this diet,
Yeah,
and if you're not, everything's going to be awful for
yeah,
you, right? And I think both Dr. Terry Wahls and Samantha were very, very open and said, you know, if you stop following these diets for a bit and then come back to them, that's okay. You know, think of it more of as a lifestyle, and they might not work for you, but elements of them might work for you. And think of it more as a sort of a long term journey rather
mm.
than this sort of yo-yo thing that's often associated with diets. You know, if I hear the term diet, I think that's something that I'll probably do for 6 weeks, and then I'll go back the other way and be back on the lager and chocolate. You know, but yeah, so it's more of a long-term approach to
Yeah.
actually change the way that you're living, and you know you'll feel healthier as a result of doing that.
Yeah, I think that's it's so funny because I guess that the term diet, quite often people associate diet with weight loss, and then they will think of some of these like really extreme weight loss diets where you just eat, I don't know, cabbage soup for 2 weeks, lose lots of weight, and then you regain it all because you go on a complete binge afterwards, because it's just not, you know, applicable to life to eat like that all the time. Whilst if you're following some of these plans that are much more thought out, and but you want to make sure that you make it sustainable in the long run, that you can actually follow this and that you are enjoying it. So I think it's really important that when you decide to do anything like this, that you do your research, and you pick something that you can actually stick with. Like you say, it's not as you're going to be doing this for 4 weeks. If it's good for you, then I guess it's something that you are going to continue on for, well, I don't know about the rest of your life, but for a long chunk of time of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both of our guests kind of mentioned that, didn't they? That,
Mm.
you know, this is a long-term goal. This is not a 4 week thing that you do and then you
Yeah.
stop. And I think the other message that we really got from them was, you know, work towards more healthy eating patterns, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
You know, the things to avoid, we already know the things to avoid, right? Like ultra processed, high saturated fats, high refined sugar options are probably not going to be great for your health. So if you can eat more whole foods and more nutritionally dense food, then that's going to be better for you overall.
Yeah. But I guess we should also mention that there are a few other MS-specific diets. We couldn't fit them all in. That's why we picked the two of the biggest ones. But if you want information about this, there's things like the Best Bet diet, the Swank diet. You hear a lot about these different MS diets, and there are probably new ones as well, because there keeps on being new ones popping up. But we do try to keep up to date with these things on our website, so we'll pop that link in the show notes as well. And there's also other information on there, like how you can perhaps, ideas on how you can perhaps improve your diet, or things, other specific things like more research, which we will be talking about in our next episode coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've listened to this and think, oh, I've got some questions about diet, or actually any other aspect of life with MS, we do have a free confidential helpline service that you can get in contact with. They're available from Monday to Friday, apart from UK bank holidays. Outside of those hours, you can, of course, leave us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So the helpline number is 0800 032 3839. If you'd rather get in contact with the helpline team via email, you can get in touch with them at ask@mstrust.org.uk. And we'll also make sure that all of this is listed in the show notes below too.
And you can also come and find us on social media amongst the fitness influencers and the in your feed of diets and whatnot. Maybe you just get the same kind of feed that I do, which tends to be more like happy animals and pandas and things. But anyway, you can find the MS Trust on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube and Twitter and TikTok. And you can find this podcast on most places where you would be finding your normal podcasts, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube Music. This video is also up on YouTube. We love it when you get in touch and you let us know what you thought of this episode. Maybe you're following one of the diets that we featured and want to share how it's worked for you, or maybe you're following another MS diet that you'd like to talk about. Just let us know. Drop us a comment on social media, or you can drop us an email at comms@mstrust.org.uk. And now I think it is time to go and have some lunch.
That sounds good to me, Helena. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.